Hey guys, welcome into another episode, Little Bit of Life podcast with your host, Little. I have on an incredible guest with me today. Not only do we have the same last name, which is wild to me, trust me, I'm probably going to be diving into that family tree here pretty soon. But her name is Tara. And if you have seen a lot of those shows and a lot of the social media, different adaptations, and there's many different articles, you can kind of get an idea of what trauma is for someone. But when we really sit down and talk to someone, that's when it really opens up. I want to invite Terra Newell on today. Hi, how are you? I'm really glad to have you on with us.
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me. And it's crazy that we have the same last name. I was like, okay, someone asked me about you actually before Carol put us in contact. And I
Hmm.
was like, I wonder if we are related.
I know. I've even reached out to family members like, okay, does anyone know who this is? Are we is she like a long distant cousin or something? Like, are we related? So our last name is not something you see very often. So seeing that, I was like, oh my goodness, this is meant to be.
Yes.
When we have seen the series Dirty John, it is not only something that so many people watched and really clung to, but it's about your life and your family. So, we want to talk about that just a little bit, but also this episode is talking about trauma and how trauma can not only affect us on the day to day, but how we use the trauma and actually better ourselves in the future. So, with your family and with your mom met John early back and they got married after 2 months. So, a pretty short amount of time.
Yes, a very short amount of time. I just met him. I had a fight with him, and then she got married right after, which was the plan of his because then he isolated my sister and I, and then there wasn't really other people buzzing in her ear being like, I hate this guy.
Hmm. Were you really protective of your mom? Like once that kind of came up, you're just like, this is too fast. I mean, I know I would be with my mother. I'd be like, this is too fast. What are you thinking? What are you doing? Was that kind of how you were with your mom?
At first, I was like, I don't know what's going on. I'm just going to try to give him a fair chance.
Hmm.
But we didn't know that they got married until like a year down the line. So we didn't know about that whatsoever.
Hmm.
So we didn't have that to be like, what?
Mm. And with John, he had a pretty bad past. It was something where he wasn't really who he said he was. There was a lot of things that you guys encountered and found out. And it was something that, from what I'm reading, you warned your mom a little bit. How did she take that? I can only imagine getting advice. We're the children giving advice to our parents. It's supposed to be the other way around, especially when it comes to dating.
Yes, 100%. And you don't listen to your child.
Hmm. Yeah.
Most of the time, you don't listen to them, you know? You're the person that's supposed to be wiser, smarter, and sometimes we learn different things and we're able to be better in certain areas. We're able to learn certain ways, learn certain techniques that are newer and modern to us, and our parents may not be aware of them yet. So,
Hmm.
it's really important to listen to your children.
Hmm.
Listen to your children, validate them. And I do understand from my mom why she didn't listen to us at first because we did have a lot of problems with a lot of her boyfriends. And a lot of her boyfriends were not the greatest guys.
Hmm.
So it's like this constant of your daughters calling you out on your toxic patterns. And that gets overwhelming and annoying after a while.
Hmm. I'm sure as a parent too, it's like you almost feel, okay, is it just because you don't like this person? Or, we see it so many times if you just don't want me dating, is my attention being taken off? Especially when it comes to mother and daughters, we're very close. So I'm sure that was very difficult for her to see that. But you just had a gut feeling. Something just wasn't right. And you just kind of knew it once you started kind of seeing how they were interacting. Towards the end of their relationship, your mom, I mean, when we look at it, your mom was in a very toxic, like you said, toxic situation. And when you're dealing with somebody that has, narcissistic tendencies and very manipulative, it's very hard because it affects everyone around them.
Oh, 100%. And what John was a psychopath. He was a serial perpetrator. He went after so many women. He turned around so many situations where there was one incident where he actually attacked a woman and he fell down, broke his teeth. She had to pay for his veneers.
She paid for him.
Yes. So
Wow.
he was able to turn around everything on every woman that he was ever been in contact with, and even men, because he would threaten lawyers, he would get them disbarred. He had a lot of power for just being one person.
That's scary. When you think about the power of somebody has with their words and their actions, that is manipulation at its finest, which is very scary. So, especially towards the end of the relationship, and from what I've, read and stuff like that, it's something where he was very much stalking and watching and waiting, not only your mom, but also your family. Were you aware of that, or was it just something you're like, he's just one of those, he's just never going to go away?
It was one of those where I would always look over my shoulder and then I
Mhm.
would be like, someone's behind me. Someone's behind me. Oh, I was going through a breakup at the time. Well, I got out of a breakup and then I was going through it because I was with that person for 5 years. And then I was really struggling with my identity and figure out who I am and how I need to learn to cope and deal with my trauma, even from the past.
Mhm.
So I would walk alone at night, like from the bars, and I would be like, someone's watching me. And I felt like he was. I feel like there was a little bit of proof. I don't know if it was that one time, but he was definitely watching me when I would go hiking. And he would watch me sometimes at work, I believe.
Mhm.
So he would know the layout of the land and know my schedule. And then he would go stalk my mom and my sister. But, me speculating that he would watch me at my work is because of like certain things.
Mhm.
I don't have 100% proof, but it's really crazy what your intuition picks up.
Mhm. Absolutely. It's something I always say, your gut, you always have to follow it. Your gut will always tell you something. That intuition kicks in, and it can be in the most random moments where you may not even understand it. But I think the human intuition is so powerful, especially in moments where, like you said, you may have put yourself, you're at work, you're safe, but something just doesn't feel right. Which brings us to August 20th, 2016. It's the day that changed your life forever. What happened?
So I was trying to go to the Jason Aldean concert that night. And so I literally had someone call to make an appointment for their dogs, and they were a no show, which I believe that call was John. In fact, we 100% believe that call was John because he had a fake French accent. And that's also why I know he was stalking me on the hiking trails, because I met two Rhodesian Ridgebacks and he called about those dogs.
Hmm.
So those dogs were a no show. So that messed up my schedule. Little
Mhm.
did he know. He was calling to really get my schedule, but he messed up my schedule by making that appointment. And I went home early, got ready, like a little bit ready, just like put on foundation and blush, and then came back to work early so that I could leave early to go to the concert. And then I left about like 5:15, 5:10,
Mhm.
and I get home, I park in my parking lot. My dog's barking. I look over and there's a guy with a tire iron and he's fidgeting through his trunk. And I tell my dog to knock it off because I feel like it's like a homeless guy.
Mhm.
And then I park in my parking spot. I get out of my car. He grabs me by the waist, looks me in the eyes, and said, "Do you remember me?" I look up. It's John. I don't say anything. I just try to escape him. And then I ended up falling on my back. And then he was on top of me. At this point, I was aware that he had a knife and he was trying to stab me. And I was able to kick the knife out of his hand. My dog was attacking his ankles. And then the knife fell on my right hand side. I picked it up and I just started wailing on him. And I killed him in self defense.
Mhm. With a lot of the social media and articles, it says one of your favorite shows was The Walking Dead. And when we watch and Walking Dead, I was a huge fan of it, and it's something where in that moment you said you learned a lot about even just watching that show. It was that intuition, and you just had that instinct of just self defense. You have to save yourself, especially in that moment.
Yeah, it was this save or be saved kind of thing. This or this what do they say on this show? Why am I blanking? But it's this kill or be killed. There.
Yeah.
It's this kill or be killed mentality.
Hmm.
And unfortunately, that is so true. I was going to lose my life if I didn't fight and if I didn't defend myself. And if I didn't kill this guy in self defense, he would still be torturing my family and other women to this day.
Hmm. After that incident occurred, how was it with law enforcement? I mean, when we hear about traumatic experiences like this, we don't really talk to you as the victim. You were in that moment. How was it going through law enforcement and with the interviews and having to go through that situation because it's so traumatic for you?
I felt like I was being accused of something. They weren't the kindest to me, but then I'm 5'2" and this guy's dead. So, I
Hmm.
mean, it doesn't look good for me. However, I never went to a grand jury or anything because I had a bunch of 911 calls that were confirming what had happened,
Hmm.
and a lot of people saw from their balconies. So after they went through all of that evidence as well, I was cleared and I didn't have to do anything. But I did get interrogated when I was in the hospital, and they didn't allow me to get medical care in a sense. Like,
Hmm.
I was wrapped up, but like they didn't give me stitches or anything. And then at one point when I was able to get stitches, I told them I didn't want to get stitches without my mom there.
Hmm.
They told me that my mom went to be with her husband. And so like I was upset over that.
Hmm.
And the truth was they told her that she needed to go identify him, because that's what you do in this type of situation is you have to identify the person, especially if you're quote unquote still married to them.
Hmm. When you go through such a traumatic experience, this isn't something that, with therapy, medication, there's so many other natural ways that you can deal with this, but so many people don't understand that it doesn't just heal you. You're not cured. It's not, it doesn't just leave your memory. So, how has this traumatic experience affected your life? Was it something I can only imagine looking over your shoulder for long periods of time, being nervous, having anxiety, or anything like that?
A lot of things. I had panic attacks. I was in shock at first. And so I convinced everybody. I was like, I'm okay. I'm okay. I'm okay. You guys worry about yourself. Don't worry about me. I'm good.
Hmm.
And then it kind of hits. And then I had panic attacks, like screaming, like panic attacks. I got into an altercation with my sister, and that ended me up leaving and going to Texas actually and living there for a little bit. So I there was a lot of things that I like, certain noises. Like, I
Hmm.
still to this day, I don't want to be in crowds. I don't like to go to bars. Like, bars aren't my thing. I think if you go to the Daily Mail, there's like an article of me getting grabbed at a bar.
Mm.
And so I'm just like, I don't like bars. And it's just like, drunk guys just like grab girls sometimes, which
Hmm.
that's never okay. That's never okay, but it still happens.
Hmm.
And I'm not a fan of alcohol, to be honest, but if you drink, like, do you just please don't get drunk and then grab people?
Yeah. Yeah. Being that this happened to you and this is something that's changed your life forever, how does this work as a female's perspective in dating and relationships? Is it something that's also caused a little bit of conflict and have anxiety? I can only imagine, dating and kind of going into that world of, this happened to you. One, how do you explain, hey, this happened to me and you have this incredible story? But two, has that kind of carried over into the anxiety and kind of being comfortable or being almost like readily aware all the time of your surroundings?
Yes, I'm very hyper vigilant all the time. In fact, in yoga the other day, a man laid next to me, and my sister was also supposed to like confront her abuser during
Mm-hmm.
that time, and it was my abuser too as a child, um, because we were molested as a child, and so I just was like, I want to punch him in the face. I want to literally push him over when I'm doing like warrior pose. I'm like, can I just shove him?
You're like, this is going to be my form of yoga. Let me just do this to just center myself.
But I was like, I can't shove the guy. I can't have physical contact with someone, that will get you kicked out of your yoga studio, and maybe like he might press charges and stuff. And it's absolutely not okay to harm someone that's like never has intended harm to you either. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, this is my own personal problem. I'm just going to lay down and breathe through this,
Yeah.
because I needed to sit with the uncomfortable feeling in my body and let myself process why I hated him.
Hmm.
Why I hated a random guy next to me.
So, have you found that yoga for you is very therapeutic and it's something that has really helped you through dealing, not only dealing with the trauma, but also finding who you are and going through this process as well?
100%. I think that yoga is very therapeutic to honestly anyone dealing with trauma. I have talked to so many people, and I used to be this way too. I was like, I hate yoga. I don't want to sit here. It's like you're just sitting with everything. But it's like
Hmm.
you have to practice sitting with those emotions. Like those emotions are always going to live in your body. The body is always going to keep the score.
Hmm.
The body's always going to hold that trauma. So it's better to learn how to breathe into it, work with that trauma, and sit with it. And then I also believe that you should also do a combination workout and like do cardio in your workout, because it's good to get that fight mode out, and you're like working through it that way. Where yoga, you kind of have to sit through it when you get into your fight or flight or freeze fawn mode, and you have to like work through breathing through that,
Hmm.
which the breathing, especially in the exhale, will help you control your breath, control your heart rate, and that will help you control your mind. So
Hmm.
I think yoga is super important for like the mind body connection as well.
Yeah, it sounds like you're finding that healthy balance between your emotions and then what's going on in your brain. Because for me, my
Yes.
brain never shuts off ever. And it always seems to kind of overcome emotions sometimes. So it's finding out that balance for sure.
Yeah, and even doing stuff like meditation and learning to sit with that too. That is actually going to help rebuild your brain back to
Hmm.
the chemical balance it was before trauma as well.
Hmm. When the network chose to do this series, what was your thought on that? Did you find it to be a good idea? Because you're like, okay, now like everybody kind of knows my family business. Did they follow kind of the life, or did obviously they more kind of script it towards entertainment?
So the LA Times, when they did this series of articles, they did the podcast. We
Hmm.
weren't aware it was going to be a podcast, and we just didn't know about podcasts or anything.
Hmm.
So we found out a couple weeks beforehand that basically it was going to be turned into a podcast. Us not knowing, we're like, oh, sounds great.
Yeah.
And then it ends up now has like over 90 million listens. And I was excited about the series, to be honest, at first,
Hmm.
because it was with the production company that produced Survivor Squad, or not Survivor Squad, that's my podcast. The
We'll get into
Suicide
that.
Squad. Yeah, but like the Suicide Squad, and Wonder Woman, and a bunch of the DC movies.
Hmm.
So I'm a huge fan, especially of the DC universe, and I was just like, oh my gosh, you did the Suicide Squad. I still want you to do my stuff.
Yeah.
And then I worked in production a little bit beforehand and in the TV and film industry. So I started asking my friends about the deal and everything and what they were giving us. And they were like, oh, you should go shop it around.
Hmm.
Like, they could do this with that, and they could do this with or without us.
Mhm.
So I did look into getting an agent. However, the show was sold to Bravo for 2 seasons already.
Wow.
So if I go and I try to sell my story, that's competing with that because that's already sold. And there's a chance that if I sell, it could just sit on the shelf and not be made at all.
Hmm.
So I'm like, okay, I could go about this, maybe try to get some more money from it, or I could literally sign on to this project with what they're giving me
Mhm.
and have something to do with it.
Mhm.
I mean, I was appreciative that they included me in my attack. However, I do wish they gave me more money.
Yeah. You're
That
like
money's long gone.
you're like, "I went through this. That would be great to actually see something for that since you're using my story." Yeah, for
Yes.
sure.
You know,
Yeah.
it,
That brings us to the Survivor Squad that you mentioned. You have a podcast. I'm so excited. I know you and I have talked on the side about this, but for listeners that don't know yet, this is going to be just mind blowing for me. I think this is going to help so many individuals that have gone through trauma because I feel like when you go through a traumatic experience, it's almost from the society's point of view of don't complain, stay silent, work through your emotions, work through your feelings, and then all of a sudden, poof, you're better. And that's not how
yeah.
it goes. So give us some information. I'm super excited about your podcast.
Me too. I'm really excited because we just actually released the trailer today on Apple.
Hmm.
So if you guys feel like giving it a review, subscribing to it, anything that just helps build the algorithm, and even with, this
Hmm.
podcast as well, do it too.
Yeah, thank you.
While you're at it. So I'm super excited because Collier, my partner, he is a survivor. He was 11 years old when his mom was murdered by his father. He overheard the murder and later then put evidence together and essentially took his dad down in court at the age of
Wow.
12. And that's like probably a horrible synopsis. I probably don't do it justice whatsoever. But that's like my synopsis of
Yeah.
it. And we have on amazing guests. Like the other day, we just interviewed with Kim Goldman. Her brother, Ron Goldman, was murdered by O.J. Simpson
Mhm.
along with Nicole. And so that's a really interesting story because I've never met a person that hasn't heard of that story.
Yeah.
And I grew up hearing about that story, thinking I was probably a little bit more involved in it than I thought.
Same. Yep.
Yeah, and so, you grow up with this and you feel so close, but you don't know anything about what happened. Like,
Hmm.
I mean, her brother was a nice guy that Nicole left her sunglasses behind. She called the restaurant. He came and tried to give her the sunglasses and her to altercation, and that's how he gets killed.
Hmm.
Like he wasn't in a romantic relationship with her, like the media makes it out to be.
Yeah.
And we also interview Rita Isabel. Her brother was murdered by Jeffrey Dahmer, and she didn't have anything to do with that Netflix series whatsoever, and just sees it on the television one day. And
Hmm.
it's funny because actually both of those people have stuff by Ryan Murphy. So Ryan Murphy.
Hmm.
Mm. And it's unfortunate because those programs are very great done production wise.
Hmm.
Yet, and I even have friends that worked on the OJ versus the people or whatever,
Hmm.
and it's crazy how the victims, how the survivors are not involved, how the family members are not involved.
Yeah.
And these people are able to just like publish this, and then one day we see this. Like, even I watch TV and I'm watching a show, and like a random show will be like, oh, be careful about that dirty John, and I'm like, oh, that's my attacker.
You're like, oh, thank you.
Yeah.
And like we said in the beginning, it takes you back to that moment. You're taken back in little, even just like you said, a commercial can come up or a clip can come up and it takes you right back to that moment. And that's what
Yeah.
trauma really is about, is you are affected in so many ways and you have so many triggers that you may not even know is a trigger anymore, or it could be a new one. It's so heart-wrenching to me, especially when I saw, all of the Netflix coming out with Jeffrey Dahmer. It's almost making the perpetrator in this spectacular light and then just casting shadows on the victims. And I feel like that's what so many of these production shows are doing. It's making a traumatic moment with the victim seem not as important and focusing on what happened with the person that we don't need to be giving them a gold star. We don't need to be, focusing on them with a flashlight and a spotlight. So I think it's very degrading and it's so hard to actually be able to continue forward in your growth of going through trauma when, like you said, all of these things just keep popping up every which way when it comes to production.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and it's just insane because I'm not the only one out there.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not the only one experiencing this. It's like the Boston Strangler, there was a show that came out about that. One of the victims was like, "What?"
Mm-hmm.
And we all talk. We
Yeah.
all are connected somehow.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, with the new trailer being out today on Apple, like she said, go give it a listen, go give it a review. It helps that algorithm, but it also supports the victims. And I love that you are allowing a podcast and the space and a voice for victims to speak up in what they're comfortable sharing. I feel like, especially having you on when we talked before, I always provide a platform for you to give your story that you're comfortable with. If you're listening to this, you're like, oh, I've seen this article, I've watched this show. You only know what the media is projecting. You do not know the victim. You don't know the feelings. You don't know what they've gone through and all the hard work, like yourself, that you're putting into your life. This is your real life. This isn't a story. This isn't a script. This isn't something for entertainment. So, if you're listening to this and you have somebody in your life that has gone through a traumatic experience, it's important to let go of the story and focus on the individual and the process of healing, because it's so important, especially with mental health. We talk about on this podcast all the time. Traumatic experiences really are detrimental to your mental health and they last for a lifetime.
Yeah, 100%.
So, if we have a listener right now that may have gone through a traumatic experience, they're not comfortable talking about it, they're scared, they don't know really what ways to turn, what advice would you give them from just really, from your personal experience to maybe healing and what options are best out there?
I think it's best to confide in someone that's safe because if you hold it in and you're not letting it out, it's going to stay stuck in there.
Hmm.
And you forever aren't going to be able to process it. And, people may think I'm like talking about my trauma too much or like, but here's the thing, I talk about certain parts, like I talked about everything in this episode
Hmm.
did not trigger me whatsoever.
Hmm.
And like, think about for you even to say your story, like you could get to the place where I'm at today or a better place or your own personal space that's your own good, because healing is not linear. And I think it's just starting to talk about it with a safe person.
I agree. Well, I'm really glad that you came on today's episode and shared your life story, and it's very personable to you. I think that you are incredibly strong. I think that your podcast is going to change so many lives, not just from the listeners, but like you said, even the victims having a chance to tell their story, to get it off their chest, to feel comfortable, to have that safe space, and to really be heard and listened to. There's a huge difference nowadays of someone listening to you and somebody really hearing what you have to say. So I think you're incredible, not just because we share the same last name. I don't even know where that connection is, but I think you are just so fantastic of taking what could have ruined your life and you've changed it to help and change other people in the process.
Thank you.